founders of, yes, we're recording. That's good. Thank you for remembering. We have one of the founders of Truth Brigade from the National Truth Brigade coming, and she's going to talk about the new and improved Truth Brigade, which I think I'm pretty excited about because they've made things easier and better. So we've got a kind of a chock full program. But I'm going to say, please keep on saying where you're from and maybe how you learned about this. Oh, am I not loud enough?
No.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you clear.
Okay, I will get closer so you get to see more of my face.
Well, we got a great comment from Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, who says she loves listening to Eric every week on the Stephanie Miller Show. So Eric, you can tell us how to find you there. That'd be great to know about.
Sure.
And because there's going to be so many of us tonight, we're going to be muted. And what we're going to ask is that if you've got questions, and for each section, you have some questions, could you please put it in the chat? And we're going to ask that you write out ask first, like all capitals, ASK, and then write your question. And we'll try to get to those so that everybody can, get the questions answered.
Yeah, and I see we've got a question about what the Truth Brigade is, and we will certainly be talking about that.
That's that midsection. You're going to learn an awful lot. And we're going to have a quiz after the end, right? No, don't worry. Now, we are going to be using the chat a bit. I hope you're comfortable with using the chat and also know how to save it, because we are recording, are we not?
Yes, we are. We're recording.
Okay. Yes, Lenny, we're recording. Thank you. Anyhow, we're going to be, I lost my train of thought. Do you ever do
You were
that?
saying that you said save. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, but we were talking about maybe saving the chat, and you may want to save the chat just for the information in there. But I also promised we will send out a link to the recording of the meeting, and we will include the materials that we referred to in the chat. When we give you a link, we'll include that in our follow-up email to everyone who registered for this call. So you don't have to be frantic about doing it, but I do, if you want to click on some of those links and sign up for Eric's newsletter or sign up for Truth Brigade Illinois, when we put that link in there, feel free to click on it, but we will send a follow-up so you don't have to be frantically writing anything down.
Yeah, but if you're like me and you're in a Zoom meeting and there's links in there, you want to go and follow up on them right away and look at it. But
Candace, you just point out to me that that we've turned off letting us save the chat. So we will, if there's things in there that you need to save, we can save it and send a copy to you. But I will also make sure that any links that are in there are repeated in the follow-up material.
good. Well, I'm excited. We are now at 109 people, which I think is a pretty nice group, and we're growing as we go. Welcome again to Truth Brigade Illinois. Now, some of you know me because you've been coming to these meetings for a while, but those of you who know me, you might not know this thing about me, and that's that I'm a former journalist. And I have to say, I've become increasingly alarmed at how the mainstream media just isn't getting it right. And they seem to be so critical of Biden. And when I discovered Press Run, which was several months ago, I got very excited to see someone actually calling the Beltway media out, calling them on the carpet. Eric Boehlert's that man. Eric is a veteran progressive writer and media analyst. He started out his career writing for Billboard, I found out. And he's a former staff reporter for Rolling Stone and Salon. He spent 10 years as a senior fellow at Media Matters for America. But it was just about a little over 2 years ago that he launched his own newsletter called Press RunMedia, the home of fearless media commentary. He's also the author of a couple books, and I like these titles. Lapdogs, How the Press Rolled Over for Bush. That's nice. Bloggers on the Bus, How the Internet Changed Politics and the Press. So I'm happy to have Eric here tonight. And Eric, we all know that Fox News doesn't even pretend to be fair and balanced. But in the last 5 years, we've seen mainstream media go easy on Trump, that big liar, and then has shifted to being critical of Biden and inaccurate about his accomplishments. So, Eric, why does the press get things wrong so often? And is there anything we can do about it?
Great question. So it's funny, when you said I started Press Run, it was the middle of the Trump years, and so I spent a lot of time detailing how the press, wasn't doing a good enough job, right? And yes, he was kind of a madman, and yes, he clearly was a pathological liar. But the press kind of danced around all that stuff, right? They invented this new rule that you couldn't call the president of the United States a liar, even though Washington Post fact-checking department said he lied 20,000 times. So I spent a lot of time detailing that. And then when Biden came into office, I knew there would still be a need for sort of a proudly progressive critique of the press, but I didn't realize how much of a need, because as you mentioned, the coverage has been really out of whack in terms of being overly critical. So why don't I start there? I'll talk about Biden a little bit, and then I'll talk about Trump a little bit, because I prefer that order in the universe. So in terms of the Biden coverage, the turning point for me was Afghanistan in August. If you go back to Biden's first few months in office, he wasn't incredibly successful in terms of rolling out the vaccine. It went from 2% to 60% in terms of vaccination rate. And he gave a speech over 4th of July weekend, and he said, we're going to be independent of COVID. And I think it was at that point that, kind of Fox News and the Republican Party, no pun intended, said, over our dead body, are we going to be, are we going to allow Joe Biden to have this victory and take this year-long victory lap because he's going to save us from COVID? But fast forward about a month to Afghanistan, and that's when the press really saw its opening, because over the summer, the press had been complaining that Biden is so boring, right? This efficient governance is boring. This is the Obama no drama approach. We don't like that. We just got addicted to 24-hour news cycles under Trump that were literally hourly news cycles. If you go back, if you're kind of a masochist, if you go back and pick any random day in the Trump administration and you look what happened on any random day in 4 years, you will be shocked at all the insanity that was constantly crammed into a 24-hour cycle. So for the country, it was awful. For the press, it was a godsend, right? I've said this before, for 4 years under Trump, there wasn't one reporter who ever went to work and said, what am I going to write about today? Not one Beltway reporter or pundit or anybody. It was, the news was just raining down on them, and it was all more shocking than the rest. And that elevated the press, and it obviously drove their ratings, and it drove their clicks, and everyone got book deals who covered Trump. It was a really good deal. Well, again, it was not great for the country. In fact, it was a nightmare for the country. But so under Biden, there was a lot of kind of simmering resentment. Like, where's the backstabbing? Where are the leaks from the West Wing? Where are the crazy tweets? What are we supposed to write about? I mean, COVID is going well, the economy is going well. What are we doing here? Where's the drama? How are we going to get, none of us are going to get a Biden book deal at this rate. And then Afghanistan hit, and that really, I think, opened the door. It was the first true kind of blockbuster story. By blockbuster, meaning it was covered nonstop for 2 or 3 weeks. There was legitimate criticism to it in terms of how it was handled, but I think the press just fell in love with, hey, we're on the crisis. We recognize this. This was kind of what we did under Trump, and people are watching. This is a dramatic story. These are shocking pictures, and so it kind of, for me, it opened the door for the press to say, we can do crisis, we can do drama, we can have a recurring characters, and we can have a recurring storyline, and we can jump right into this. And then, the Afghanistan story, the troop withdrawal was completed. But I think the press said, we like this idea. We're going to keep doing this. And then it went to inflation, and then it went to supply chain, and then it went to Omicron. And I think, the Beltway press kind of liked that idea of kind of, crisis coverage, drama. And I think the other reason why it was being driven was, how do you prove, if we take a step back, the Republican Party has been hammering the Beltway press for 50 years, going back to Spiro Agnew, in terms of liberal media bias, right? They've been the phrase is working the refs, right? They complain. It got much worse than just complaining under Trump. The press became the enemy of the people. I mean, this was dangerous rhetoric. So how do you prove you're not part of the liberal media? You go tough on a Democrat. Bill Clinton learned that the hard way. Barack Obama learned that the hard way. Hillary Clinton has learned that the hard way. Lots of people have learned that the hard way. But I think there's certainly an unspoken desire to show that you're tough on a Democrat, hold them to a completely different standard. I mean, if you look at the standard in theory that Trump created for a sitting president, Joe Biden, has far surpassed that. I mean, over the summer, I mentioned the press was getting bored. It was a serious story. I mean, the AP and the Washington Post were treating as a serious story the number of times Joe Biden was going to Delaware on the weekend. This was regularly asked in the press briefing rooms why he was taking this 90-minute trip to his home in Delaware. And we just had a president who, I think the Secret Service spent $10 million down at Mar-a-Lago. So, I mean, the Trump standard was just kind of thrown out the window, and they created a new Biden standard. And it's all, a lot of it was kind of designed for gotcha. And again, for the first 6 months, it wasn't very effective. After Afghanistan, it was very effective. Obviously, inflation is a real thing. They didn't make it up. But my gosh, the press decided that the entire US economy is only inflation, right? It's not the housing market. It's not the stock market. It's not 401ks. It's not jobs created. It wasn't consumer spending. It was just inflation. And that to me kind of became crisis 2 after the Afghanistan. And the problem is, other than it being not very good journalism, it takes a toll. And there's no question that Biden has paid a price. And it's amazing to see, the New York Times has done this story on the front page. Others have done this story after just hammering inflation for weeks and months and treating it as this blockbuster story. They'll do front page stories and saying, hey, the economy is in good shape. Why aren't Americans in a better mood? Well, they're not in a better mood because they've been getting one storyline for months and months. So I think that's the challenge that the Biden White House faces. I think they can, I think there are certainly ways they can turn it around. I certainly don't think this presidency is doomed or anything like that. I think COVID is going to be a different story for the rest of the year. The economy will be a different story and things like that. So if I'll jump back to Trump real quick. And for me, those 4 years were really mostly about just being bullied. And again, I mean, this is someone who talked about the press being the enemy of the people. So instinctively you would think, wow, they're going to give him a hard time. I mean, if Trump gets in the press's face, insults them at press briefings, and calls them morons and stupid questions, you would think the natural response is to stiffen the spine and say, hey, if this guy wants a fight, we're going to give him a fight. If a Democrat had done, had done that, I mean, Joe Biden has twice basically been forced to call reporters and personally apologize. And there's nothing wrong with him doing that, because he got into, maybe a 15-second back and forth, most recently with Ducey from Fox News. And last spring, he did it with Caitlin Collins from CNN. And for 4 years, Trump never apologized to anybody. But the press didn't, the press didn't really seem to mind that. So he came in and they immediately created new rules. Within the first week, every press briefing, not only a Trump press briefing, but his spokesperson, every press briefing was now carried live and in full. Every helicopter walk with Trump going from the White House to a helicopter, every utterance was treated as breaking news and had to be covered live. And just fast forward, 3 weeks after Biden was sworn into office, all those press briefings, the plugs were pulled. There was no need anymore to hear every word that the White House press secretary said live and in full. That was only invented for Trump, because obviously, I mean, I think the best example is CNN in terms of treating his presidency like a reality TV show. They certainly treated his campaign that way. And I think the idea was, hey, this could be kind of fun. This is going to be a wild ride, and we're going to come up with new rules, and it's going to be win-win. It's probably going to be win-win for him. It's going to be win-win for the ratings and things like that. And something I've written about all the time, and it only was towards the very, very end that the press really came around in any way, shape, or form after the insurrection, when they started referring to the big lie in terms of the 2020 election. But instantly they decided, and the New York Times kind of led the charge on this, they could not call Trump a liar. Because it was it's not something you call a Republican politician. You certainly don't call a Republican president that. Dean Baquet of the New York Times at one point explained, well, we don't know what's in his mind. We don't know his motivation. Maybe he's just misinformed. Maybe, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's the president of the United States. Well, Washington Post and others pointed out, Trump told one lie specifically about the border. It was either about the funding or how much had been built. He told that lie 89 times in public. I don't think you need to be a mind reader at that point to understand that he's lying, and everybody's he's lying. But the press spent 4 years, burning through their thesaurus, coming up with these ridiculous, innocuous phrases. He's spreading falsehoods. He's exaggerating. And people would come back to me and say, well, why does it matter? It doesn't matter. This is just a semantics debate. It's no big deal, if you say falsehoods. And I think it is a big deal, because I think if the press had the courage to put lie in the headline for 4 years, Trump lies about taxes, Trump lies about the Democrat, it absolutely has an effect on the public conversation and the public perception. And the flip side, that reporters would say, well, it's not that big a deal. Well, if it's not that big a deal, just do it. If it's not that big a deal, just call them lies. Oh, well, we can't. Well, I guess it is a big deal. So, and again, this goes back to, the fear of the liberal media bias and fear of seeming to be non-objective, and also the fear of being the target of the right-wing wrath. I mean, it's a big deal when if someone like a Tucker Carlson or a Glenn Beck calls you out and starts making you a journalist the target of a smear campaign. That's not fun, and no one likes to be on the receiving end of that. And if you do kind of get, if there's questions, in a newsroom, well, he or she kind of, they kind of lean Democratic, if they're supposed to be a straight reporter. It can be a hindrance to your career. So I think careerism has a lot to do with that as well. Again, after the 2020 election, the Times and others started putting lie in the headline in terms of the election and the recount, particularly after the insurrection. But that's basically all. That's all evaporated. We still, I still tweet out. I tweet about headlines. Last week there was a CNN headline about falsehoods, and they're still doing this. They're still doing this. I mean, Trump came down the escalator in the Trump Tower in June of 2015 to announce his presidency. We're going to come up on the 7th year anniversary of that this summer. And the press is still kind of tiptoeing around that stuff. And so one other point, and then, I'm happy to answer lots of questions and stuff. But I think one of the other driving reasons behind this is the media is really, really reluctant to accurately describe what the Republican Party has become today. And I just tweeted this afternoon, I said the Republican Party is pro-COVID and pro-Putin. And that's not really debatable at this point. You've got governors who have done everything in their power to continue the pandemic, to continue the spread of the virus in hopes that it'll cause, political problems for Democrats. Obviously, it's no secret that there's a portion of the Republican Party that is, and Fox News, that is openly, pro-Putin at this point. But that's not really how it's described in the press, in the Putin and the invasion in Ukraine. Well, the Republican Party is splintered. Well, there's factions. And it makes it sound like they're talking about, tax policy or immigration. That would be like after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and the Democratic Party was split on whether, they should condemn an invasion. Can you imagine, kind of ho-hum coverage from the Washington Post? Well, some of the Democratic Party is pro Saddam Hussein and some of them, don't think the invasion's a good idea. I mean, it's inconceivable. But we're at the frog in the boiling water where all of this stuff becomes normalized over time. And if anyone had said 2 or 3 years ago, Putin's going to invade a sovereign neighboring country, and the Republican Party probably isn't going to care or is going to root for him, you would have thought, well, no, that can't really happen. This is one of our major political parties. And now it very possibly will happen. And it's just kind of shoulder shrug coverage. Nobody, Trump came out yesterday, called Putin savvy. Oh, I wish I had that idea. I maybe would have, invaded Mexico, was basically Trump's point. I haven't seen 3 Republicans who have been asked about that. They never have to be held accountable for Trump's comments. The press did that for about a year or 2 on Capitol Hill during Trump's presidency. And after a while, they just gave up because Republicans didn't have any answers or anything like that. So now the entire Republican Party gets a pass on that. And just to go back a million years, I mean, during the Clinton impeachment, every Democrat in the country had to have an official position on Bill Clinton and impeachment. You were not allowed to talk about anything else. They basically had to issue, official statements every week to describe whether, what did you think about what? Obviously, the Republican Party today essentially gets a free pass. And a lot of that is just this slow, the simmering normalization. And I'm sorry, go to the point why the press doesn't want to do this. The press is absolutely committed to portraying the Republican Party as a center-right party. And that's how politics has been covered in the Beltway for at least half a century. There's a center-left party and there's a center-right party. They're mere opposites. They're filled with honorable, honest people doing their best, and that's how the media wants to portray this conflict in politics today. It doesn't reflect reality at all. I mean, we have a portion of the Republican Party that has just gone straight out QAnon. Some of these people running for office in this cycle are just astounding in terms of their positions and things like that. But the press is so committed to center right, center left. Mitch McConnell, he would never, he would never tell a lie. He's an institutionalist. He cares about the U.S. Senate so much. He would never break any rules to harm the U.S. Senate and things like that. So I think the two driving forces are fear of liberal media and not wanting to really tell the truth about the Republican Party. Because once you tell the truth, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. If you're honest about the state of the Republican Party, if the press had been honest about Trump was, absolutely basically a raging lunatic and a pathological liar, you can't go back. And they knew Trump was going to be on the horizon, not just for his presidency, but beyond that. So they've decided not to tell the full truth. They tell maybe 60 or 70% of the truth, but they don't really tell the full truth. And that's what's so frustrating for many of us.
Thanks, Eric. We have quite a few questions. I'm going to try to get through
Sure.
as many as I can. And thank you, Etta, for putting all of them in a nice document so I don't have to go looking. So, and Etta, how much time do we have?
We've got
Go ahead, Candace.
20 minutes, about 20 minutes. We should be in good shape.
Okay. All right. So one of the first questions was about whether emails, individual emails to ABC, CBS, NBC, do they have any effect, either individually or if you had a group decide to all send it at the same time?
Yeah, I think they do. I think journalists are open to these kinds of critiques or criticism. I think there's so little communication now between news consumers and the news organizations that if there is any, and if it's respectful and if it's well stated and things like that, if it's not a wild harangue, I think they get plenty of those from the right wing. But I think it does matter, and I think that those voices need to be heard. And I absolutely would encourage people, particularly if you can get editors' email addresses rather than just institutional producers, executive producers, even the anchors and things like that. Yes, I absolutely encourage that.
Okay. And what other actions do you think activists can take to try to refocus the press?
I think just being vocal, and I think Twitter is a really good way to do that because journalists all read it and they all see when their names pop up. And yes, they're busy doing other things, and yes, they might ignore some of it. But it's really an amazing way to communicate with journalists. I mean, pre Twitter, it was hard to get the attention of journalists. Again, they were kind of secluded. They had the walls built up around them. But whether it's Facebook or Twitter or other social media, they're absolutely out there, and they absolutely see their names, and they are very cognizant of when people are criticized. So if just, in terms of keeping the conversation going and keeping the heat up, if you think you see a headline that's awful, find the person who wrote it and maybe respond to the link that they did. And again, do it in a respectful, serious way, and just say, come on, we got to do better, and just spell out real quick. That stuff matters, and they pay attention to it.
Okay, great. This is a little long one. I think I'm going to summarize a little bit, but definitely we want Biden to be covered fairly. And we certainly want to support him, but we also, want to push the administration when we disagree. So how do we balance that and still get the press to, push the press in the right way? But how do we even personally balance that? What's the best approach?
Oh gosh, well, I think for me they're like they're two separate things. I think those two things rarely overlap for me. Usually when the press is falling down on the job, it's because they're mimicking and they're parroting Republican talking points. And I've said many times, every DC news cycle starts with the same premise, which is, what is the Republican Party angry about today? And everything starts from there, and it shouldn't. And so for me, I think that's one of their biggest problems. In a weird way, very rarely do I think they mess up by giving the left like too big of a voice, or being too serious, or giving it too much space. And when folks do try to push the administration further to the left, or to be more aggressive, that coverage to me usually seems pretty straightforward and pretty good. So I usually don't have a problem with that. Sometimes they lean into the Dems in disarray, the party can't figure out what it's doing, when there's just, an honest, simple disagreement between, factions of the Democratic Party, which is just politics 101. So that annoys me when there's an attempt, or just a debate within the party about, hey, we should be doing this, we should be more aggressive on child poverty or whatever, something like that. And the press wants to blow it up into this, the party's coming apart at the seams. No, they're not. They're having an intelligent, honest discussion about, the future of the country. So I think in terms of pushing the party to the left, or trying to push the administration to be more aggressive, I think that's great. And I think that's kind of a separate thing. I think you can do both. I think you can do that. I think you can be critical of the press coverage. Again, rarely do I see instances where, when the Beltway press even pays attention, to the Democratic left. I usually don't criticize it because it happens so rarely. I want it to happen more. So it's usually, please do this more often.
Okay. Do you believe that the fairness doctrine should be reinstated?
Well, it wouldn't, in theory, but it wouldn't really do any good because it doesn't apply to cable news. So it doesn't apply to Fox, and it doesn't apply to any of the stuff that's destroying our country. Yeah, it would only apply to, it would apply to AM talk radio, but that doesn't really have as much sway anymore. And it would apply to the networks. And I just don't think there's any way to do that. It was a very kind of unusual window where the fairness doctrine even existed. And in theory, it was a great idea. But I wasn't, it wasn't a surprise that Ronald Reagan got rid of it, and that opened the door to Rush Limbaugh, because then you could do 3 hours a day of just bashing one side. So it's never coming back, and even if it did, it wouldn't fix the biggest problems right now.
Okay. So another question was, to what extent do you think our mediocre media coverage relates to the ownership of the media by big corporate interests?
Yeah.
And lack of funding for in-depth investigating?
Yeah, it's a big, it's such a huge part of it. And particularly if we talk about local newspaper ownership, and what, the hedge funds have done to local journalism. We have state houses around the country that are barely even being covered anymore because of cutbacks and things like that. But, the CEO of CBS famously said during 2016, Trump is, bad, might be bad for the country, but he's good for CBS. And people have remembered that. And it's true, because the media is in such a hyperactive, hyper advanced landscape in terms of chasing clicks and chasing stories. There's still some really good investigative journalism, from lots of the major players, but a lot of the day it's just kind of aggregate stuff that low income, low salary, and low level people are just kind of regurgitating in order to keep the clicks going. But I think in general, the corporate ownership is a problem. I don't think they certainly don't care about journalism the way, some of the corporate owners, newspaper owners did 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. I mean, CNN prints money. They don't even know what to do with it all. But they're not putting it back into journalism. They're putting it into, entertainment documentaries and things like that. If you watch, it's really interesting. If you turn on CNN International and watch it for a day, it's so much better and it's so much more interesting. And it's what, cable news journalism used to be. And then you switch back to CNN, here, and it's just, it's so deflating and it's so thin and it's so pundit based and things like that. But some of these gigantic companies, I mean, the New York Times has never had more digital subscribers. To the Washington Post, to its credit, I think I just announced the other day they're hiring 20 reporters just to cover climate and try to make it part of the daily news coverage in lots of new and inventive ways. So there is some hope that some of these people will take their enormous profits and do better journalism. But for the newspaper industry, it's probably already too late for most of them.
And this is from the same person who asked the earlier question, but since you watch the media so closely, some of the major problems facing the US, structural racism, inequity, climate change you just talked about. Do you feel like that is getting covered at all like it should be? And do you think the same thing, if you don't, do you think the same thing that we talked about as far as, big corporations is part of the reason for that?
I think it's, if it's not, I think it's more of lack of imagination. I don't think that there's an edict from big corporate, hey, we can't cover X, Y, or Z. Climate change, I mean, there's, 5 years ago when there was radical, dangerous weather, it was rare. Climate change was rarely mentioned in the news coverage. Today, it's pretty regularly mentioned because it's become so obvious. But when you have a rash of truly deadly historic hurricanes, a lot of these places in the third or fourth paragraph, they'll talk about climate change and they'll talk about what it means and how it's impacting. So, there are slivers of hope in terms of, there is an acknowledgement in terms of what's going on. And again, just, 3 or 5 years ago, that was rarely mentioned in disaster weather coverage. And it drove a lot of people it was very frustrating because it was so obvious what was going on. But we see more of that. So I think if structural racism and things like that, I think it is being covered more. And if it's not, I think it's just because of, like I said, lack of imagination, lack of diversity in newsrooms, lack of perspective. And some of the news organizations are trying to get better at that. And it's interesting, a couple, Philadelphia Inquirer and Baltimore Sun, just recently in the last month, basically apologized for decades of racist coverage, which was based on covering predominantly Black neighborhoods virtually only through crime. That was the only way these portions of the city were covered for decades, was just as crime blotter. And they went back into their archives and they basically posted apologies, which is again a step forward.
Baby steps, but good.
Yeah.
So this goes back to fairness doctrine again. Somebody was wondering, could you change it so that it did cover all media? Because you mentioned that cable would have.
Well, yeah, I mean, but in theory, yes. But I mean, Biden couldn't even get one vote for the COVID relief package, 12 months ago. So, yeah, And yes, in theory, you could look, I've pointed out a few times at Press Run about, in terms of the COVID coverage in Fox, Rupert Murdoch owns properties in Australia, in Britain. He has political power in those countries. His media properties are very conservative. Their COVID coverage looked absolutely nothing like Fox News. He has unleashed a specific kind of hell on America with Fox News. And if you take a step back, Australia and Britain have pretty serious media regulations, and people are held accountable by the government. Private media companies are held accountable by the government in terms of spreading lies about a public health crisis. So, I don't think it's any coincidence that Murdoch runs wild in the United States, because the Republican Party has made sure there is no regulation, and his media properties look very, very different, even though they're conservative in other countries that do have serious oversight.
So we just have to elect a lot more Democrats, and then all problems solved. So do you have any recommendations other than Press RunMedia on where we should get our news?
Oh, that's always a good question. It's always a tricky one, because I criticize the mainstream media, but they also do a really good job. So I would absolutely read the Washington Post every day. The New York Times is such an amazing, I always say the New York Times is an amazing newspaper, except the DC bureau. There's something wrong culturally. It's been something wrong for decades there. That's a whole separate talk. But the rest of the newspaper is kind of astounding and wonderful and curious and does great stuff. I think the Atlantic can be good. I think, in terms of just mainstream coverage, Reuters for me seems to keep it very factual and not get caught up in kind of the Beltway spin and things like that. I wish there were, obviously some of the shows on MSNBC I really like. I wish there was, a large, powerful beacon, that I really loved and could really point people to, but a lot of it is smaller. I mean, there are a lot of interesting voices out there, and you just kind of got to poke around and look for them, I guess.
Okay.
Linda, I don't know if you saw this one. What's your take on the public media like NPR?
Yeah.
Are they part of the solution, part of the problem?
Well, I wish I could say they're a part of the solution, but if I'm being honest, I think they're part of the problem. NPR, I think, was guilty of almost every sin that the Beltway press was during the Trump years. Refused to call him a liar. Framing stories through Republican spin. Nonstop inflation stories under Biden, and again. I talked about this fear of being part of the liberal media. NPR has a special fear because the Republican Party has made it quite known that has made it quite plain that they will absolutely try to defund them if they don't like what they're doing. And people in public broadcasting can say, oh, that doesn't affect us. We're journalists. And I think they are a lot of great journalists, but it absolutely affects them. That is not a fight they want to have. And especially when leaders of the Republican Party are becoming so kind of detached from reality and irresponsible, they absolutely would try to defund public broadcasting. So I certainly think during the Trump years that NPR could hear the footsteps, to put it that way. And unfortunately, I think their coverage kind of reflected that.
Okay.
But I do love lots of their shows.
So this is probably an impossible question to answer, but you hear all the time that the media is, a liberal media in general.
Oh, yeah. It's a good
liberal.
Point. Yep.
But obviously that's the Republican talking point. But do you have a sense of, on balance, where you think the media is? At least the mainstream media?
Oh, and like politically?
Yeah.
I think in the Beltway press, Oh, gosh. You know, I don't know if like scale of 1 to 10, like 1 being conservative and 10, I don't like 5.5, you know, I think a lot of the, I mean, yeah, I think a lot of them obviously saw what Trump was doing to the country, and it wasn't a mystery to them. I don't think many of them, again, we're talking the mainstream elite, you know, news institutions. I don't think many of them thought it was a good thing. But I think the biggest issue is careerism. And I think that's why people pulled their punches for so many years. They knew better, and they danced around it, and they let Trump get away with it. And now I think with Biden, I think, you know, again, it's careerism, wanting to prove you're not part of the liberal media. You want to stand up. So, but back to the central, you know, basically center is how I would describe, if I had to guess, most of the journalists are.
Okay, all right. Well, I think
One real quick point. I've always said that, you know, the Beltway press is again a point. You know, every news cycle starts with what is the Republican Party. The journalists in the Beltway have always worshipped Republican hardball. They just think it's the most amazing, savvy thing they've ever seen. And so to me, that'll be my caveat with, you know, if political journalists are basically in the center, they have this love affair with, you know, tough bullying Republican men. I don't know what it is.
Well, so our best bet in terms of addressing all of this is what I'm hearing you say is email the editors if we can find them, tweet at the reporters. Is that our best way to call them out?
Yeah, and you know, on Facebook, we don't have to hand up Facebook over to the right wing. You know, conversations and you know, conversations with your friends and pointing things out and boosting other liberal voices and other independent voices. You know, when I was at Media Matters, we called it the right wing noise machine, and it really was. And that is a deep pocketed infrastructure that they have built. And it's all of it's dishonest, and all of it is funded by billionaires, and they have a huge advantage. But the idea of repetition and the idea of spreading the message and the idea of getting, you know, voices involved and things like that, it's all right now all we can do. And I would just say, you know, in terms of Democrats, I wish some of them have gotten better. There's a whole generation of Democratic politicians who still think, you know, the New York Times is on their side, you know, and if we can just get the facts out, if we could just tell our story, you know, they'll help us. And no, that's not how it works. And so you do see some members who are a bit more savvy and who punch back on Twitter in a good way and try to hold the press accountable. I wish we had a lot more who are willing to do that, because it's important for the press to see the Democratic Party itself is sick and tired of this, and they're going to voice their opinion as well.
A quick question. A couple of people ask, when you say the Beltway press, what are you referring to?
You know, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, you know, anyone who's got a bureau in DC, Reuters, AP, and then Politico, you know, The Hill. Now we have Axios, just kind of like the real hyper, the media that pays hyper close attention to politics. You know, the three networks, NPR obviously all does that as well.
Got it.
Okay. All right. I think we're at the end. I will say that I think one more thing based on what you said is that we can also, besides going, you know, the tweets to the actual journalists and sending emails to the editors, based on what you just said, we should also keep our own elected officials accountable and see how they are responding to the press. So that's probably another thing that we all should be looking at.
So, and urge them to be vocal and again in a, you know, in a serious, respectful way, and have them add their voice, because again, the press knows the Republican Party is all in on the media stuff, and they feel like they don't really have to worry about the Democrat. Yeah, they're never gonna, they don't put up a fight. And if we get something wrong or the spin isn't in their favor, there's no price to pay. There's just no price to pay. And I don't mean like in a awful way, but it's not even a bad day for them at work, because nobody's pushing back from the Democratic Party.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Eric, for joining us, and this was great. We'll do the people can do their own clap from the emotions. So Etta, I'll hand it back over to you.
Well, yes, thanks so much, Eric. You've
My
given us
pleasure.
A lot to think about, and it's kind of a nice introduction then to talk about what the Truth Brigade is about. And so who better to tell us than Candace and Linda. So what we're wanting to stop disinformation. Some of it's in the press, some of it's from wherever, but tell us what it's all about.
Okay, so the Truth Brigade has been around for a couple of years as part of the Indivisible national organization's attempt to share the truth and to fight disinformation. And in Truth Brigade, Illinois, we started in the last year to sort of carry on as part of that and to do everything we could. So I'm going to try to share the screen. Ed, if you want to talk, hold on. Here is mine. I think this is going to work. Let me check it out.
There you go.
Can you see that? Do you see it okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to turn on the slideshow. So best way to tell this is to talk about the 5 commandments of truth telling. And what we try to do is we put posts out there on Facebook, on Twitter, and try to fight disinformation by telling the truth. So you want to talk about commandment 1?
Sure. So there's 5 commandments that are kind of followed to do this. And the first one, which I think is the one we're most guilty of going against, at least at first, until you learn this, is don't amplify the disinformation. Don't respond at all. If you respond either on Twitter or on Facebook, you're just sending it out there for more people to see. And what I have found, especially on Facebook, it seemed like when I was doing that, the original post kind of showed up for everybody, but your comment didn't always, they could get lost in the shuffle. So it's just best to do not respond. It doesn't mean you're not going to do anything. Just do not respond to that original post.
And what I love about the Truth Brigade is it gave the answer to, oh my God, they're putting out those lies again. It's like, whatever you do, don't amplify it by commenting on it, but go out and do it yourself. So the commandment 2 is you go and make your own posting and use what we call a truth sandwich. This is the format for Truth Brigade that we use them pretty consistently, and it works pretty well. So what you've got is the top of the sandwich is you start with the shared truth. You bring people in by saying something that we all agree on. The middle of the sandwich is the calling out the lie. You talk about the bad actor, the person who's spreading the truth. And then the bottom layer, you restate the truth, but you do it in the form of starting with your values. You name something that we can all agree on. Villains, the bad guy who's telling us something wrong, and the vision, which is how we want things to be. So that's the format for our posts. Oops.
Okay. And then, yeah, so commandment number 3 is you want to use, if you can, whatever you're posting, use a link to a credible news source. Now we kind of talked about, which one do you want to use, and or a graphic with your post. And the reason for that is, number 1, if you can get a source. Now, the people that are adamant that they're not going to agree with you, they might not read it, but many people will read whatever you're posting, and it might make them think a little bit. But secondly, and this is why even a graphic, if you can't find a post, is people stop at the pictures. So if you, especially on Facebook, if you post something that's eye-catching, then somebody might actually read the detail also.
Right. And commandment 4 is we share it by using hashtags Truth Brigade, Truth Brigade Illinois. And so we want people to use hashtags and post their truth on social media, Facebook, Instagram. We haven't gotten much into TikTok, but we certainly could. And that allows other people to find it and share it, and for us to count the impact that we're having. And commandment 5, sorry, I'm not.
Get there? Okay. When you said TikTok, now I'm thinking, do we have to create a dance for Truth Brigade?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. That would get people either in or out. So the final one is, now that you know about the hashtag, is to go find other people's posts and, amplify it. So you can, just repost it, you can comment on it, whatever you can do, but it's good to go find somebody else's. In fact, when you're first starting this, and it's definitely with Twitter, because I don't use Twitter that much, but I can go look for these hashtags and then I can just, retweet, and that's easy to do. So it's a way to make sure that it gets on, because once you retweet, anybody that sees you is going to see it. And then if somebody else likes it, then it gets to other people. So this is how the disinformation or misinformation gets out there. So this is our way to try to get the truth out there.
That's right. Share it. And because people say, oh, well, you're not going to change people's minds, and you're not going to change the people's mind who are on the far right, but there are far more people who are in the middle or who can be moved a little bit by getting accurate information. So it's really important for us to get accurate information out there. So let's give you an example. And Etta did this based on something Eric posted today. So here would be a typical truth sandwich. We start with the values. We all want the pandemic to be over and to get back to normal. Yet Fox News continues to politicize the COVID vaccine. Even one of its own anchors nearly died of COVID last month. So we're calling out the villain there. Turn off Fox and listen to the scientists, including epidemiologists at Harvard, who estimate that 135,000 people died needlessly in the last 6 months because they weren't vaccinated. We can get through this. So there's our vision. We can get through this, call them out. Our vision is we can all get through this. Hashtag Truth Brigade Illinois, and a link to the article, which when you click on it and you put it on Facebook, it will pull up the graphic for the article so that it's eye-catching. So those are the types of things that we like to post. Facebook, anywhere we can. Obviously for Twitter, Etta's going to have to work on shortening this one. But,
Right.
yeah, but it's a good one. We wanted to provide you with some links and resources. We're going to send out these slides. We will put it in an email to everyone who registered. So you'll have this information before tomorrow, probably. But you can sign up for Truth Brigade Illinois. We keep an email list. We also have a Facebook page, and that is a private group where we share truth sandwiches and information with each other and support each other. We have a welcome document that you can click on that gives you all sorts of resources. Then there's the National Truth Brigade you can sign up for. And what we've just started, Linda's helping us with, is we're going to do sandwich shops on every Friday starting March 4th. We're going to have an hour from, what did we decide, 11:30 to 12:30?
Actually, 11, I think we said an hour and a half, 11 to 12:30.
11 to 12:30 every Friday, where we will just workshop truth sandwiches and post together and maybe do letters to the editor, anything we can do. And then in between these meetings, we have every 6 weeks, we have every 6 weeks, we have a workshop meeting. So our next workshop meeting, which is an hour-long meeting where we help, it's a slightly bigger meeting where we will have resources on Twitter, or how you get information out there and share the most recent national campaigns. So we will send that to you. So you've got all of that information. So Etta, do you want to take it from here, or do we have any questions?
I had a couple of questions. Yeah. What do you guys, Candace and Linda, you're both good at writing truth sandwiches, but what makes it, sometimes for me, it's kind of hard. What's the hardest part for you guys in writing a truth sandwich?
I think for me, because as you know, Etta, I don't consider myself a really good writer. Although
right,
I seem to come up with some okay stuff. But it's making sure that it sounds like me and not just a formula. So, you start out with kind of the, following the levels of the sandwich. So your values and, then the enemy, if you want to call that, or the bad actor, and then, finalize with, let's all work together. I have to be careful that somebody reading it who knows me, isn't going to think that I copied it from somebody. So even if I'm using somebody else's, the harder part is figuring out how do I make it sound like me.
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And I have Facebook friends that are what I call sort of frenemies. And so for me, it's always thinking through how is it going to come across to them? Because I'm really careful to not make it critical, because I used to want to be sarcastic and send out, how could people be so stupid? That doesn't change anybody's mind, and it just turns people off and it offends them. So for me, it's a matter of how do you get the truth out there and call out the bad guys without saying mean things, right? And so lots of times it's calling it down to, it's not every Republican, it's some politicians, or it's being really specific about who the bad guys are. And like you said, thinking it through in terms of how's my sister gonna read this as if I'm just putting out propaganda, right? So I try to be careful about that. And someone asked, and this meeting's being recorded, and we will send out the link to the recording as well. Jody Rein just put a comment in there. We're going to talk with her in a minute, but she said thinking through shared values helps a lot. So I think when you start with the shared value, I try to think of things that even those people who disagree with me, like my brother, would agree with. And that's a great place to start.
Okay, well, another question that I think could come up is like, maybe I don't do Twitter. Can I still do this?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, you can do Twitter, you can do Facebook, you can do TikTok, but you can also do it in person. I mean, the messaging and the thought around the messaging works just as well with the live conversation. And if you listen to people, but try to get yourself to common ground, then try to, then call out the misinformation and say things like, well, why would you think that vaccines wouldn't work? And that you really can get into a conversation then. So it's, even if you're not a social media fan, it's wonderful exercise for you to think through this way and to share it with a conversation.
Yeah, and I will add that the conversation in person is probably the hardest one, because you can't plan. So
Yeah.
I think doing this, on social media, and just kind of practicing it there will help you in the actual conversations, because, it's easy to get aggravated, and, we all do that. So this is a good way to kind of practice getting rid of the aggravation and trying to find common ground. Without agreeing. I mean, you don't want to agree with the false information, but trying to find like the value so that, you can try to have a conversation and get people to see some truth.
Yeah.
Good. So one of the things that, Candace, you mentioned that we have a Facebook group. One of the things that we do is we actually post a post that we might put out big on Facebook. We do that in the Facebook group. And that's kind of, is that kind of like to let people know what they could do? Because you can't share from there, right?
Right, but it's also, yeah, it's to let people know they can copy it, they can do a riff on it, they can use the resources there, use the graphic there. And I do think it helped the repetition, you know, everyone doesn't have to be unique. If you repeat it, if it sounds good and you keep on sharing it, that's how we get the message out there, because repetition is really important. Sometimes it may take 5 times for people to hear it. So sometimes just sharing other people's messages, if it sounds good to you and sounds like you, is fine. You know, I do an awful lot of just liking and retweeting because it's good information.
Great. Well, Linda and Candace, thanks so much for going over what our group here in Illinois is like. And we welcome people who aren't in Illinois too. So Debbie, you're good. And anybody else, I know we had someone from Alaska, so that's great. Now, I thought the best thing for us to do is learn a little bit more about the origin and what's changing in the National Truth Brigade. So we've invited Jody Rein to talk. And so I have some questions I was going to ask her, and Jody, and Candace, can you make sure you make her a co-host, please?
Yes, I will right
I don't
now.
know if she needs to be, but Jody, I listen to you regularly when you introduce the Truth Brigade on the regular calls that the national group has. I'm not totally sure how Truth Brigade idea was born, but I think you were part of the origin, weren't you? Can you just give a quick little insight into that?
Yeah, I was. So I'm on. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. My name is Jody Rein, and I'm an organizing manager with Indivisible. And I spent. I'm not going to take too much time going through my whole life, but much of my professional life, I worked in book publishing. I was an executive editor in New York. I lived in Chicago for a while, actually, and worked in publishing. And so, as you could probably guess, you know, words and facts and truth is also quite fundamental to my core and identity. So then when Trump got elected, like many of you, I just felt like I had to turn my life upside down and started volunteering all over the place to see. I decided I wanted to actually change careers from publishing into advocacy in some way. And so I started volunteering at Indivisible, but from the very beginning, volunteering for Indivisible, and then, you know, eventually, luckily, getting hired by Indivisible. The fighting disinformation has just always been a complete priority. So I worked at Indivisible for about a year before I could kind of figure out, well, is there a role for grassroots? Is there a role for activists in fighting disinformation? Because initially I thought that really we were powerless. You know, I just felt overwhelmed, as so many of us do, by the Fox Newses of the world. I'm old enough to remember when Fox News started and just how horrifying that was, and then watching it continue to get worse and worse. And then in trying to figure out how platforms could regulate themselves, it just felt like, gee, there's really not much people can do. Either the government has to do it or the platforms have to do it. And then I sat in on, like you're doing right now, I sat in a workshop. This was in person, pre-COVID, where there was a panel doing case studies of how effective peer-to-peer persuasion is in fighting disinformation. And the examples that they were using, a union was trying to combat voter disinformation at that point. And what I learned was that people have more power if there are enough of us sharing consistent messaging and doing it authentically. We really can shift the narrative, because the impact that any one person is so much greater than bots, you know. And that was just like giant light bulb going off for me. And I just went and talked with some colleagues and created a proposal for the Truth Brigade. That's kind of how it started. Because yeah, just recognizing that not only can we do work, but that it's meaningful work and it really does make a measurable difference. It's just outstanding. And I don't know, Etta, should I talk about how we measure? Do you have another question? Because I could.
Yeah, I was, well, first I wanted to say, you heard Candace and Linda go over our 5 commandments. Do you think we got everything basically in that, or is there something that you think we should maybe emphasize a little more?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. First of all, thank you for doing this and thanks for inviting me. I was just so excited to see your presentation. It's just outstanding and exactly what we would have hoped for from the beginning with the program. And so I thought it was terrific. I thought that we've made we haven't really changed the program, but we've refined it based on what we've learned in the first year and a half of the program in terms of our messaging techniques. And I think the one area that I think all of you will find really meaningful and maybe encouraging is that middle piece of our truth sandwich, we're really leaning hard into encouraging critical thought because we've uncovered a lot of studies, one in particular from MIT, that show that most information or misinformation and disinformation sharing is inadvertent, which I just sit with that for a moment. You know, it's basically around 83% or 85% of the messages that people share. They're not doing it intentionally. They're just doing it because they're just kind of clicking, you know, without thinking. And with that's one important piece of news. And then the other important piece of news is that the same study found that you could stop 15% of those inadvertent shares from sharing with one message that encouraged them to check the accuracy of what they were sharing. One message. And it lasts for months. It lasts for months. And so that's what I was thinking about before when I was asking you about how meaningful this work is, because what that shows us is that we don't have to attack anybody in these messages, and that if we've try to fight facts with facts, we always lose because that's not how the human psyche processes, right? We all jump back. If someone's fighting with us, they're arguing with us, we just tend to close our minds, and more in this society than we ever have. But if we open with the shared values, like Etta and Candace were saying, or was it Etta and Candace? Yeah, I'm sorry. And if we open with the shared values, and then in that middle of the sandwich, find a way to get people to think by asking questions, questioning the motives of the messenger, that has long-term value. So that would be the one area that I would say to lean into is when you're writing your message, is just think about, okay, my goal is to open somebody's mind and get them thinking, as opposed to my goal is to change their minds, which is a really far away goal and really daunting, right? I mean, hard to imagine we could do that, but we can get people to think, with a question.
Yeah. I kind of think like Truth Brigade can be kind of like a drop of water that keeps coming down on a rock,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually can, split it a little bit, and then it gets in some more, and yeah. So I think that's what we're trying to do, be that nice drop of water that keeps bringing the truth there.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, a couple weeks ago, you led a meeting of Truth Brigade National where you talked about some changes. And I think some of this is kind of exciting, particularly because our group in Illinois tends to be a little more Facebook oriented than, well, quite a bit more Facebook oriented than Twitter oriented. And we maybe felt a little apologetic. I kind of feel like with some of the changes, maybe we don't have to. Tell us what's changing and how it's going to be better for us from now on.
You should be a lawyer. That's a wonderful leading question. I know just so as I said, that I think the main thing again is this. I know wasn't exactly what you were asking, but this leaning into helping people open minds and think critically. That's kind of the overarching thing to keep in mind. From a practical standpoint, we did a survey in September and learned so many of our members are very active on Facebook. And of course, we all know so much disinformation is shared on Facebook. So we are exploring creating a Facebook group for Truth Brigade. We want to do it really thoughtfully because Truth Brigade has a few different venues where people can interact with one another. You know, we send out weekly emails. We have our twice monthly webinars, and then we also have a community space on Slack. We want to be careful not to dilute what we're doing by having too many different places people can go to. So we're exploring what our most effective way to use Facebook might be. You know, how can we set it up so that it's a really effective vehicle for people to share out from? So that's what we're looking at right now is, you know, can we get involved with Facebook? We definitely, you know, want to, and we want to do it, as I say, in a thoughtful way. The other very practical innovation that we have is so simple, but we used to have our messages, you'd have to kind of cut and paste them to share them. Now we have click to tweet and click to post options in our message.
I just tried that tonight. Yes.
Isn't it the best?
Yeah.
Such labor saving. So basically, I don't know, Ed, if you want to share our campaign from tonight, I can do it when I stop talking. That multitasking is not, I'm not so good at that.
Okay, I'll go get it.
Oh, we also have Cameron here. I don't know if he's still here, but I think you guys, do you all know Cameron from Indivisible, who is also a leader within the Truth Brigade and just doing a lot of amazing things. Hi, says Cameron. Yeah, and also instrumental in pushing us toward Facebook, I should say. But if you can find the message explainer, you can see, you just do one click and it populates Twitter. And then you can then modify the message right on Twitter and make it your own. And the same thing with Facebook. It does, you have to kind of copy the message, then click and then paste the message, but it's really easy. And again, you would make it your own.
I've got it up. Do you want me to share it?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. It's an exciting campaign because I love the idea that we are getting out of ahead of the Supreme Court nomination. And the idea is that rather than wait until somebody's nominated, well, I think Jody, right? Rather than wait until somebody's nominated, we're going to get out there and be supportive. So the actual truth sandwich, if you can see it right here, this week's message is, we need qualified people on the Supreme Court. It's upsetting to see the same old attacks trying to poison minds against Black women's capabilities. I'm excited for a qualified nominee who knows about the law and helps the court represent all of America, Truth Brigade. And talk about making this easy. There's the tweet.
Yeah.
This, if I click on that link, will this do it when I'm, let's see, it might not do it when I'm sharing the screen. Well, it's very cool. You click on it, it takes you right to your Twitter feed, puts this in the feed, and then you can change it to make it more related to you if you want to. But I think this tweet is actually great. I want to see qualified, empathetic jurists on the Supreme Court. Politicians will try to divide us yet again with racist and sexist tropes. Enough already. I can't wait for a truly representative SCOTUS, Truth Brigade. And then I think the link is to an article. Jody, is that what that link is to?
That's what that one is. Yeah. And it looks like, so before we had this call, we had our Truth Brigade call and we all workshopped together, and it looks like this got edited. That's why you can't click it, but you could click the one below and it'll take you to Facebook so people could see how that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah. And Facebook, Facebook takes me right to my Facebook page and shows me that link. And then if I want to, all I need to do is cut and paste it. into my,
No copy.
copy it, copy it. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I don't want to cut it out of there, right? And just paste it into my feed. And it's right there. And of course, what I would do then is add Truth Brigade Illinois, because we double link them. And I might play with the language a little bit, but then I hit that and it's posted to my Facebook feed. So it's just it's so great. And so what we do, Jody, we take this explainer and we'll post it to our Facebook group so that people can access it.
Yeah, and I should say that link is broken right now. It wasn't broken half an hour ago, but it
Yeah, happens.
yeah, this document it's typically not editable, but it is tonight because we had a workshop tonight. So that's what's happening here, but we'll fix it.
Okay, so we probably broke it, but okay.
No, you didn't do anything. Who knows? Maybe it was me. Somebody got in there and was,
So there's
Yeah.
a lot of resources that your team has that, Candace and Linda and I may come back from the meeting and share it with the people that come, but people can come directly to the national meetings and get firsthand from you. So
yeah.
the two different kinds of meetings you have is twice a month. The first one is called Big Truth.
Yeah, that's where we feature sort of really big topics and, timely topics, and also guest speakers, big name guest speakers. So.
And then the second one is a workshop. So that's more hands-on, and there's some breakouts.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday, it's a workshop and a new member orientation. So we divide the group into, so new members go into one room and learn all about, the basics. And then people who've been with us for a while hang out to get with us, and together we workshop messages. Like if you scroll down to the bottom of that document, you would see a lot of people had written their own messages and commented on each other's.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a community, which is also really nice and unexpected outgrowth.
How many people have joined the Truth Brigade?
More than 5,000.
Wow.
It's
So,
great.
Hey, maybe we'll get some more deciding tonight.
Totally welcome. Yeah, we love having you. And, if you like online platforms to communicate, a lot of people talk with each other in our Slack channel. And, there's a discussion channel where people who are members just talk with each other and share ideas. And then there's also questions for staff. So the Truth Brigade works with outside experts, I should also say, so that the information we provide is quite objective and based on best practices in fighting disinformation. So we have consultants that are part of our team and that we work with every single day and are on every call. And if you're in the Slack channel, you can ask them questions, ask me questions.
And the links to the graphics and the articles are just great. It's just a great source of information, of accurate information.
Right. And what's the latest number, Jody, in terms of
The impressions? I think it was 235 million views since we started. I think that's what it was as of today.
I read about 245.
45. Yeah, it's just been crazy. The last couple, I'd say the last 4 weeks has just grown. It's wonderful.
And that's just on Twitter.
That's just Twitter. Yeah, because you can measure things on Twitter. You can't really measure obviously in private Facebook groups. So we figure it's probably at least another third again as high in terms of what's called impressions, which is kind of a fuzzy number, but it's exciting. It's really exciting.
So Candace or Linda, could you copy in the link for the chat about how people can sign up for the Truth Brigade National Group? Because and we'll send this out by an email to everybody as well, but we'd really like people to consider doing this, because I just feel like my life has been transformed by Jody Rein.
Oh my God, that is so.
It's how I communicate. I do it so much more thoughtfully now.
Oh,
And
man.
I thought of myself as a pretty good communicator, but I just and I feel myself being more empathic with people when I'm talking,
Mhm.
and I don't try and hammer the truth into them. I try and listen more, and then
Yeah.
gently.
Yep, it's changed. Like when I see people getting sarcastic, I'm like, don't go there, because it just doesn't help. And so I'm always trying to reframe it in terms of how do you get people to think critically, and how do we have a vision and make it positive? So it really does help, because I used to be so frustrated when you'd see something stupid on Facebook and you just wanted to say it was stupid. And if you said something sarcastic, you got into a fight with people. And this is just such a great solution. It just turns all your focus to the positive, and let's let go of that. It gives you a sense of empowerment instead of just frustration.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you,
well
thank you.
said. That's it. I mean, because it is really a dark world out there, right? And I've also learned through this whole process. And man, it feels so much better to be able to not slime in that, not swim in that muck. And just say, okay, I know I'm doing something, I don't know, like 10 million impressions. What does that mean? That's really hard to kind of grasp, right? But when you take a little conversation and twist it and find something you share with someone else, and then just say the truth about it and get them thinking.
That's great.
Yeah.
And when you have 5 minutes, you go to your Twitter account, you put in hashtag Truth Brigade, you find all of the tweets there, and you just hit like, retweet, or, and you can comment too, but you can spread the word pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, Jody, thank you so much for starting this. Thank you so much for being here, being such a good resource for anybody who's trying to spread the truth. And I'm going to hope that more people who were here tonight will go and sign up and come to the national meetings.
Oh,
But
thank
if it's a bad time for folks, and this is like 5:30, and that might, on a Wednesday night, that might be too early for some people, we will try and bring you the information that you need from those meetings. We won't do it as well as Jody and her team will do, but we'll try. We'll
Oh, come on. You guys are awesome. You make it. You make this. Yeah.
So thank you again for your extra time that you took tonight to be with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for all the work you're doing. Go
Keep spreading
activists.
the truth. Keep spreading the truth.
So Candace, what's the final thing that we want people to go
Well, I
over?
put in sign up for Truth Brigade Illinois, sign up for Truth Brigade National. We have the meetings I mentioned before. I will send out the dates and links for those. I think the next thing coming is our sandwich shop on Fridays. So I look for that. It'll be great. Come join us, have little chats about that. And then
Can I make a sandwich and eat it while I'm doing it?
absolutely lunch, if you, yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, good.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Hope to
And
see
Thank you, everyone.
let's
Okay.
hope we can see you again. Thanks for coming. I will copy the chat so we have that.
Yeah, I've got it. There was an interesting comment I just wanted to follow up on before we get off.
Jocelyn, thanks for being here.
Yeah. Great turnout.
So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.
Okay, we'll chat soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.